the ominous warning that what you say is going to be recorded and live on the internet. Slowly internet. We roll back. Cool. Yeah, so everybody, welcome to the Kubernetes community meeting for Thursday, October 5th, 2017. I am your host for the moment. My name is Jason Singer-DeMars, and I am going to be walking us through today's agenda, which really consists of two different things. And those are, we are going to have the exciting election results today for the Kubernetes steering community. And those will be brought to us by Sarah, who is not quite on the call yet, but will be shortly. And oh, there she is. She's waving. Great. Good, because I was going to have to tell jokes, which not cool. And so then once we get the results back, we're going to segue into the Kubernetes 1.8.0 release retrospective, which I sent out a little blurb on the Kubernetes dev list about this, but in short, it's essentially one of our key strategies for making the release process better and ergo the lives of all the contributors and consumers of Kubernetes. So it's a pretty big deal, and it's a great time for us to talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and most excitingly, what we plan to change for 1.9. So without further ado, let's pass the baton to Sarah to give us those results. And if anybody's got a drum roll, please commence.
Okay, we can do it without the drum roll. You can all hear me, yes? Fantastic. I've been having troubles with mics. Okay, no, I'm really just trying to elongate the suspense. So I want to give a moment of context for this. The blog post with this information is going to be posted at 10:30 on the Kubernetes blog. So if you are interested in tweeting about it, I would be sure that you, or I would ask that you put your tweets or reference your tweets at some point to that blog post as well. We have spent the last 2 years working toward a more formalized community governance, and this is the biggest step that we have taken so far. So I'm super excited to announce the winners for the 2017 election for the Kubernetes Steering Committee. Now, as you remember, there are rules around how many positions can be held by a particular company. So I'm going to go through the order in which our top voted candidates were, and then one of them, unfortunately, will not be able to take a seat because of that company limit. All of the data from this will be posted into the GitHub repository in community election 2017, so people can take a look at it there as well, and ask and answer any questions as you run across them. So the people who have been awarded 2-year seats, so these will be the 2018 and 19 seats, are Derek Carr, Michelle Noorali, and Philip Whitrock. So many congratulations to them. The person who was on the cutoff between the 2-year seats and the 1-year seat was Michael Rubin, who unfortunately, because of the minimum or maximum number of company seats allowed, will not be able to take a seat because that we can only have one additional Googler be added to the community or to the steering committee. So Michael was voted in, but is not unable to take a seat. The people who are taking 1-year seats are Timothy St. Clair, Quentin Hoole, and Aaron Krickenberg. So I want to say many thanks, and everybody's clapping on mute, which is really quite amusing. Many thanks to all of you who voted, all of you who have contributed, all of you who are engaged in this community and have given us as a community the opportunity to grow. And then please offer your support to these people. This is going to be hard work, and we are going to need lots of help continuing to grow the the engagement and the interactions that we have as we make our governance more explicit. Does anyone have any questions, or do you want me to read the names again? Everybody's silent. As I said, oh, read the names again. Okay, so the blog post will go out in, as I said, at 10:30, but we've got Derek Carr, Michelle Noorali, and Philip Whitrock for 2-year terms. Timothy St. Clair, Quentin Hoole, and Aaron Krickenberg for 1-year terms. Krickenberger, sorry, you have an extra
That's okay.
Krickenberger. Sebastian, sadly, no 3-year terms for anyone. That was in the chat.
Otherwise known as 3-year sentences, right? This is.
But yes, please, everyone, support both your new steering committee members and your bootstrap steering committee members who will be helping this next 2 years of governance evolution. Okay, Aparna is saying she's not sure she got the names. I'll do them one more time, but as I said, this will be published on the internet for all posterity in 22 minutes. Derek Carr, Michelle Noorali, Philip Whitrock, 2-year terms. Timothy St. Clair, that would be Timothy St. Clair of Heptio, not Timothy Allclair now of Google. Quentin Hoole and Aaron Krickenberger have 1-year terms. Excellent. Thank you all. Many, many congratulations. And don't worry, I'll be calling to set up times to meet and schedule the work. Because this is the fun part. Go have the party. And next we will go ahead and move on to the work. That's all I've got. Unless people have more questions. Write the names in the blockchain. Joe, do we have a blockchain?
It's like hipsters look unhappy. Add more blockchain.
Oh no! All right, I will drop the names into the chat because we have people who are saying that that in fact they are losing this at the critical moment because I'm on conference Wi-Fi.
I put the names in the chat. I'll put them in again. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you,
That's a
Joe.
copy and paste from the blog post.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
So that's the alphabetical, not the terms, but we will talk about the terms will be in there as well.
All right, well, I guess we will dip ourselves right into the 1.8 retrospective. Thanks, Sarah, for the award winners, well, community committee members. Thanks. So, hi everybody, I'm Paris. Today we're going to talk about the 1.8 retrospective. We have tons of material to cover. This will be broken down into 2 sessions, today and tomorrow. Tomorrow at the same time, same Zoom information. Before we get started, really quick, we do have some guidelines that we need to discuss. Since there's a lot of material here, 1, please mute when you're not speaking. We will ask for tons of comments and you know how you feel about certain things. So there will be a lot of people talking at the same time. So please mute when you're not. Also, please be respectful. Keep in mind that you should be talking about processes and tooling that possibly didn't work out, not necessarily persons or people. And also, please be mindful of time as we're going here. If there's any concerns at all, please private message me and we'll get those taken care of. So now on to the show. Really quickly though, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Jace, the release team lead. He did an awesome job. I've heard from so many people about the wonderful work that he did. So if we could also give him a clap as we are all muted, that would be awesome. And everybody else too that did such hard work for this release. Now let's go right into it and we'll talk about follow-up from the last 1.7 retro. Did we do what we said we did? And it looks like for the most part, that's a pretty accurate statement. We're not going to go line by line with these, but just some really quick things that that we did that were really well. We did the code freeze across all Kubernetes repos that depended on the main repo. We did burn down meetings earlier that would really help the European community. We did do some release notes templates that we standardized. If anybody else wants to actually add comments to this, to the doc itself, please do so in red, just so we know that it came from this retro meeting. But if anybody else has anything that they want to say right now about some of the specifics that you put, either Phil or Caleb or anybody else have anything that they wanted to add about what we've learned from the last retro with 1.7? Also, lots of shouts to Jennifer and Rahika for their work on the release notes. All right. So, no comments. So then let's go right into the nitty gritty here. So what went well exactly? Aaron, it looks like you're up for a few topics, and then Jace after.
Yeah, so my role on the release team was sort of like bug triage, but also as a representative of SIG testing, I was trying to make sure that test infrastructure looked good. And Test Grid was tremendously helpful for me in this regard. The Kubernetes pre-submits Test Grid dashboard, which was added during this release cycle, let me quickly look at like, are all of the pre-submit jobs working generally well across all PRs? I couldn't expect them to be passing 100% of the time because some people check in broken code in their pull requests. But it was a really, really quick heads up. And also just having a little icon next to each job that said, you know, passing, flaky, or failed gave me a quick heads up on which jobs I wanted to focus on. And then further, the summary tab showed like which specific tests had been failing over a long course of time, which let Eric Chang and myself quickly diagnose which teams we needed to go chase down for long-running broken tests. So I thought those were really helpful for triage.
And
Huge plus 100 to that. That is such a great thing to see those things.
Well, then, Jace, you can go ahead and keep talking. Looks like you're up with daily stand-ups were incredible. How incredible.
Oh my gosh. So this was Eric Feta stepping up and organizing the test crew into daily stand-ups. So I don't know how much people know, but Google testing is putting in a tremendous amount of effort on this stuff all the time. And Eric organized a stand-up because I was having a hard time wrapping my head around all the different threads that were taking place in any given moment. And it was really informative to be there and to hear the stand-ups, and just the fact that they were willing to organize that ceremony, basically because I asked, was amazing, truly great, and just truly in the spirit of the community. So also, I wanted to say that the release team specifically, I thought worked really well together, and our meetings felt productive to me. Oftentimes meetings can feel like a slog, and ours never really did. People were upbeat and focused on solutioning, and it was good. They were very effective. So I was thankful for that, because time is in short supply for everyone. I thought extending the code freeze was great because it allowed us to get a lot more time to dig into some of the technical debt around upgrade testing and whatnot, and hopefully also laid some groundwork that 1.9 will be better. And it was good too, because amazingly the schedule didn't slip because of any of that activity, nor does it seem like the velocity of 1.9 was impacted. So that was a really nice opportunity, and it was nice to see a tweet. Somebody was like, "Yay, Kubernetes for paying down technical debt instead of just rushing forward and not, paying attention to that." So that is something that reflects well on us as a community. So SIG themes superseding the release themes, I thought was great and allowed us to expose the governance model to our community. That is good for people to start seeing that the real power is in the SIGs and not necessarily some collection of people in a room somewhere that's making decisions in secret. It's really everything is transparent and true to the community spirit. So that was good. Not that there were groups of people in secret, but there's opacity has been a problem in some other open source projects in the past. So we're definitely not falling into that anti-pattern, which is great. Lots and lots of people regulars in the release process, even though not on the formal release team. These people, Jordan, Mehdi, Lucas, Shyam, and a lot of others, holy moly, every day I would go in and get greeted by people and get the rundown of what maybe happened the prior night or what was going on, and people would raise, hey, this PR needs attention or that whatnot. It was just so amazing to see people stepping up and just pitching in all the time. It was like, how is this happening? This is so amazing. So again, super awesome community. And I thought adding DIMS to the release team, Aaron kind of oversaw that because DIMS was covering a lot of the bug triage and whatnot. Great, right? I mean, this is a good recognition for somebody who's spent countless hours in trying to make things better. This feels like a huge monologue. We did a good job balancing the needs of expediency and the needs of stability. I feel really proud about this because I think we had really rich discussions around all of the things that were balancing community needs versus the needs of the release. And so stability was never cast aside in terms of expediency. And I think that's a huge thing for us to continue doing. And hopefully release teams of the future will continue that pattern, because I think it's important for us to have those discussions, even though I will tell you at times they were difficult. And there were times where I actually had to, as the release lead, play the devil's advocate for an alternate viewpoint that I didn't even agree with, because I felt like those opinions needed to be in the room. So I think that's super important, and hopefully something we'll see continue. Aaron, looks like you've got a couple other things, and then off to Maru.
Yeah, sure. So I felt like the SIG release Slack channel was pretty active. I don't know, for me, I view like a constant stream of stuff happening in the Slack channel as a sign that people are engaged and stuff is actually happening. Long periods of silence can be a little unsettling at times. So, and I know this is going to sound stupid, but like, seriously, all of the emojis and Slack reactions that were being thrown around helped a lot to let people know that, like, yes, I saw your message, or yes, I'm doing a thing, or yes, I think burritos are delicious. Like, that was all really, really helpful. And the activity there made it like, if you had a question about what was going on with the release, you knew that could be a place to go find some engaged people and figure out where to go from there. So I thought that maybe it's just the recency effect, but I feel like this is the most active I've seen that channel. Certainly the most emoji I've ever seen. And it was really good. I certainly found it tremendously helpful. And sort of back to Jace's point about the daily testing stand-up, like I just want to give a shout out to the EngProd team at Google and the folks who are in charge of test infra and SIG testing, because we tried to really be very mindful of the release this time. You know, there's a lot of attention paid to code freeze and making sure that the code itself is stable. We thought maybe it would be a good idea to make sure the test infrastructure is also stable, and that like maybe we don't try changing the test infrastructure while the code isn't changing all that much. So we really tried to evaluate each and everything we were doing with like, how much is this going to change what is familiar to the release team? What is the potential risk of deploying this change? Can it easily be rolled back if we find out that something is broken? And I'm sure I'm biased since I'm like co-lead of SIG testing, but I think we did a decent job of keeping things relatively stable compared to last time. There's some big changes we're planning and rolling out in 1.9 that we could have started rolling out now, but we decided to, you know, hold off to make sure that the release actually got cut and tests passed as much as possible. So with that, I will hand off to Maru.
I just wanted to briefly mention that we did have success with the issue triaging automation implemented by Munger. There was something like 150 issues open when code freeze hit or code slush hit. 90 of those just got pushed out by the Munger. So those are things that people didn't have to care about. And going forward in 1.9, we're going to improve that. There's going to be process in place from the get-go that requires that issues the milestone receive SIG approval. And if they don't receive it within like a week, they'll just get pushed out of the milestone. So hopefully that'll just encourage both issue owners and the SIGs that are associated with those issues to take action in a timely fashion, so that when we come to the end of the release development cycle, we'll actually be able to just focus on things that are actually actionable versus just flailing at issues that we have no idea what their actual import is. That's all.
Thank you. Next, we are going to the next section of the retrospective. What could have gone better? And the first up is Aaron with several items.
Yeah. Okay. So the biggest one for me, above anything else, was that we have these dashboards in test grid and they have the word blocking in them, almost as if we're going to like not cut a release. We're going to block the release until all of the tests in those dashboards pass. And what did we do? We cut builds when the tests were failing. We cut alpha builds when the tests were failing. Nobody seems to care about alpha builds, and that's fine. That's a separate topic. But we also cut our beta builds when tests were failing. And then we had a last minute, highly engaging 90-minute conversation over whether or not it was appropriate to cut the final release and ship it out the door because the test was failing. And it's a test that had been failing for the entirety of the release. Now, like, we sort of like we have started to coalesce around humans looking at these things. But like, we also have our tools looking at the release blocking test lists. And we actually had to change the amount of time that Anago waits or attempts to find a build that actually passes all of the tests. It was going into basically an infinite loop because it couldn't find a build of Kubernetes that passes all of the tests that are supposed to define that Kubernetes is working. I think we seriously need to actually use those tests as blocking. And I think we need to prune the blocking lists down a little bit. We sort of set out 1.8 saying like, okay, this time for real, we're going to pay attention to these tests. They have the word blocking in them. We're totally going to do it. And then we didn't. We didn't do it early on. So to me, it was a red flag that we started ignoring this for the alpha. But again, nobody cares. We started ignoring this for beta because I guess we had to keep marching on schedule. Like, not cutting a build and actually blocking the release, I thought was supposed to be the stick that, you know, having blocking tests failing was supposed to provide us. So I feel like we ignored one of our tools, which led us to a situation where, yet again, humans have to interpret test results, and it takes a lot longer. It increases the feedback cycle, and it reduces confidence in the stability of the build. We also found that apparently we just generally don't exercise Anago a whole lot. So we ran into another like weird corner case that's probably covered by tribal knowledge. But apparently, when cutting the when cutting beta.1, Anago is now set up to look at tests in the release 1.8 board instead of the master board, and like not all of the tests had been ported over in time. And so it seems like there was a little bit of coordination that could have helped in making sure all the tests were ported over from master over to 1.8. There's a bit of tribal knowledge in what tests actually belong in a release blocking, a release board versus the master board. If I look at the tests in release 1.8 versus release 1.7, they're slightly different, and I don't know why. Let's see. Next item. I've seen this happen pretty consistently every release. The release team doesn't seem to know how and why code gets merged. this time it seemed like nobody really understood the use of the approved for milestone label or exactly how it worked. I have faith that we're going to get significantly better at this now that we have the milestone munger in place. And I regret not being Johnny on the spot with the fact that if you go to the submit queue and click on a tab called info, right there is the set of criteria that the submit queue uses to decide if a pull request is ready to merge. There's also a tab that explains the sort order for what labels and milestones and due dates and stuff the submit queue uses to decide whether or not something should be at the top of the queue or the bottom of the queue. This is all information that is updated live as the configuration for the submit queue is updated live, because some of you may not know we have different submit queue instances for the different repos that the Kubernetes project runs. And some of them can be configured with different criteria for like labels that they look to block on or milestones that they're going to restrict merging for. And that documentation for that stuff actually gets updated live as those configs change. So I feel like we're in a situation where if we could socialize how to point to live docs that are updated as the code changes, we'll be in a slightly better situation. But I almost question whether or not the release team as a whole needs to rally at the beginning of the release process, or certainly before code freeze is enacted, to understand, like, do we understand what are the criteria for code getting merged and all that stuff? Because we all seem to have to reverse engineer the mechanics of this whole process every release cycle. I've always seen a release team get really confused. And then what starts to happen is we look for people who've been in the release process the longest, and we rely on their tribal knowledge, which is, I mean, that's why I've attended so many releases, is to try and help carry that forward. But sometimes, like, my knowledge might be based off of a release that happened 3 quarters ago, and it might be antiquated. And that might cause us to lurch around as we try to figure out the way things are today versus the way things used to be versus the way things should be versus the way we want them to be. And just like having that all documented in a place would be helpful.
Aaron, what could we take as an action item from that?
Well, so like I said, I feel like increased socialization of the existing places that are updated live as we, like if there are places that are in charge of merging code that don't have documentation sitting right next to them that explain how they work, we should make sure such pages exist. And for the things that do have that, we should socialize those links and make them more applicable. And I think we are getting there, but that sounds like a good action item to just like enforce that. There's probably some documentation in the community repo that could be updated, and I probably have some takeaways to add to the test info repo for, like, for example, you can't deep link to the sort order and the merge requirements page. You have to like tell somebody to go click on the info thing and then click on this other thing, and that's a little confusing. Let's see. This one I don't have an action item for right now, but a concrete case of a generic of a class of problem I saw is where we had test cases that we needed to remove from older release branches because they no longer worked against the newer release, or we found that like the tests were poorly written in the older release. And we don't have a way to flag that, like, oh, actually, the test in 1.6 relies on an alpha endpoint that no longer exists, or a beta endpoint that no longer exists, or things of that nature. And so what we ended up doing was going and just like removing those tests from the older release, which kind of reduces the fidelity of the earlier releases testing against the earlier release. But hey, it got it passing in the upgrade tests, so that's cool. And maybe that's appropriate for where we're at, but it seems like there's like a mechanism missing to gate what tests should be run against which version of Kubernetes. And I think Tim St. Clair even opened an issue about this somewhere, but I don't have it offhand. I'm going to kind of skip past the submit queue blockage things. I tried to document as many as I could find as we ran into them. I just wanted to highlight, you know, root as the closest thing to root cause as possible. One of them was that the AWS tests were sort of far astray. We ended up getting a meeting with Justin Santa Barbara, the primary author of COPS and the AWS tests, with the SIG testing folks who were in charge of making sure that the 300 test jobs they manage are all relatively consistent. And we sort of got the COPS job from being far afield to back into that same set of consistent jobs. and we got it to a point where it was a blocking pre-submit once again. So I think that was a good example of the right people breaking out and getting into the virtual room and hashing it out to make sure that it worked. And the only other one I'll call out is the submit queue blockage around Bazel failing. That was just something that happened completely outside of our control. And it was something we were responsive enough to fix. Maybe we could have fixed it a little bit sooner, but just an example of sometimes the submit queue breaks. It just happens. Okay, I get to hand off to Jason Ehor at this point.
That was all really great, Aaron. Thank you. Yeah, and I would +1 everything you said. It was spot on. So, the next couple of bullet points are really, I think, indicative of where the project is at in terms of our governance model, because it's shifting. I mean, obviously we elected a steering committee now, and that we're looking at ways in which we can arbitrate decision-making at a high level. So there's things, I think there are things that we still do out of inertia, as opposed to things that we should be doing out of necessity. And I feel like what we ran into with some of the product management activities and in the way that we view releases and whatnot may have been more based on how we had to deal with realities of releases, say 2 or 3 releases ago. And even when you read the SIG PM charter, it really talks about, hey, we're making this up as we go. We're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. So I think there's an inherent feeling in SIG PM that that this is all being made up as we go, and that these are things that we should revisit. And I think that we're definitely at an inflection point with product management where we need to revisit what those activities are, how we think about the value that goes into the product and whatnot, especially in light of the work that Caleb Miles has been doing to establish a formal proposal process about how we add value. And so essentially what I think we're going to see develop is that what gets into Kubernetes is not going to be quote unquote a feature, but more about increments of value that we're delivering, because value can be defined as something that's user facing or something that's internal or something that is going to increase contributor experience velocity or whatever that is, but essentially making it less like people think of a feature as in, hey, I can do this thing in the UI, or I can, now deploy this kind of workload. It's less about that and more about how do we enrich the ecosystem in a way that works. And so what I'd love to see is more synchronization between product management and what's actually delivered in the release, because ultimately SIGs are driving that and not the PM group necessarily. So the PM group, in my opinion, should pivot toward more of of collecting valuable feedback from the user community and how are we serving the needs of all of our various audiences, internally, externally, the companies that sponsor a lot of development and whatnot. So I think that's a big takeaway from this for me. Ehor, is there anything you want to add on that? Because you're in CPM and you're along with us and you manage release features. So I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say there.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to absolutely second everything you said. It was the consent that we have already raised before the release process has been started, but unfortunately it was like deep summer, not so many people were online, and we have put most of our proposals on hold until the release has been cut. So actually we've started working on enhancing our job to make it more efficient in terms of the product management, and we actually had several discussions. How can we enhance that more from the purely technical value, but also to the ecosystem value and so on. Speaking about the issues that we had exactly in this release cycle, it was mostly about our total asynchronous work in terms of the product management side, in terms of the features tracking and features management with the technical implementation of that stuff. So we have even faced a few features that have been submitted and committed in the last few days before the release has been cut, while we had the formal deadlines. The first formal deadline for feature submission was on August 1st, and the code freeze has happened on September 1st. So we have to define how can we collaborate with people who actually write and proposing code to merge better. Yeah, and next item. So if we are done with this one, Jace, would you like to proceed with the next one?
Yeah, go ahead and hit that one.
Yeah, and speaking about the action items, so what I've said like a few seconds ago, that should be our like primary action item for the next release. So to elaborate deeper on how do we do the product management stuff, how do we do the high level product management of Kubernetes as is with like implementing some functionality into it. Actually, the proposals are currently drafted. We're going to discuss them in the next few 6 p.m. meetings. So I hope it will be solved for 1.9 really soon.
Yeah, and I've told a few people this, but I'm working on a proposal too to how do we enhance that connection between SIGs and product management too. So stay tuned on that. Okay, cool. So then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next bullet point, which is the missing consensus model around who is empowered to make the final call on the go, no-go. As Aaron said, there was a 90-minute discussion on this. Basically, and it was kind of funny because we were down like everybody's in agreement on one course of action, and then somebody got added to the meeting sort of late, and they had a diametrically opposed viewpoint on whether we should release or not, and so it kicked up what I thought was an absolutely phenomenal discussion about what are the unbendable things that should be true for us to release or not. And in that moment, I felt like I tried really hard to get consensus around that, and ultimately I think that it was a group decision, but essentially I think I was on the hook to make the call or not, or at least to adjudicate all the various forces around it to try and come up with a consensus answer, which I think we did. But I couldn't go and look at a policy that says you shall not put out Kubernetes with a blocking test red. I mean, there's just nothing like that. So it was a very, to Aaron's point, this is a tribal knowledge thing. So as a release lead, I did the best I could, and I tried to take the onerous responsibility of managing everybody's viewpoint equally, but it was hard, and I would love to see us codify that more, and also understand what is the release lead actually, what are the powers that are invested in the release lead to make those kind of decisions, and what are the guidance around that?
So one thing that we might want to think about here is if you look at the Apache process, there's a very formal process for signing releases that involves, the essentially leadership group for the top level project. So there is sort of a very formal, like, we are blessing this release in the name of the Apache Foundation type of thing. The CNCF doesn't have any sort of, official type of thing like that. But it feels like Kubernetes is getting to the point where we're mature enough that we might want to have more formalism and some sort of like kabuki theater around signing the releases, which might be one way to sort of, at least sort of, put a pin in it when we do release. Larger discussion though.
Yeah, and that gets into the heart of some really interesting things about the CNCF and how hands-on is that with the actual mechanics of Kubernetes.
So I'm just going to say, wearing both my Kubernetes hat and my CNCF hat, that CNCF has nothing to do with this. Like, Kubernetes is as big as the whole Apache Foundation. We should just decide what we want to do. It may not make sense for the other smaller projects in the CNCF.
So I don't want to derail the meeting here. I apologize. I mean, maybe this is something that we can take up in another forum, but my understanding is that there's some sort of limited liability, sort of like you're doing it on behalf of the legal entity versus people over time. But it also would be a way to actually, have sort of some cross checks on sort of, is this release ready, and a way to sort of surface to some level of final decision maker on this stuff. I don't know if that's something we want or not.
Well, I totally think that we need to come up with a formalized criteria and process, and something like approvers for shipping the release in addition to the criteria, because the criteria will never cover every situation that comes up. So I do think we need to formalize that, but I think the burden is on this project to formalize that. And in particular, I think SIG Release should come up with a proposal and then we can just iterate on that going forward. We can investigate the liability issue, and I agree that CNCF is kind of our legal arm. We do have a software license that discusses liability that ships with the release. I don't know if there's more we need. We can ask CNCF for a legal opinion on that, and that's sort of how the relationship works. We ask for things, and CNCF can give us an answer.
I will just once again make a really, really big plea for actual passing tests. It seems like that is the easiest way in a codified manner that is consumable by a computer where no humans are involved.
Right.
Yes.
So we need to identify
what. There's going to be some room for things to go wrong. There's always going to be some level of question on this stuff. Are the tests valid or not? Right. So, I think, like, ideally it's going to be as all automated and obvious and trackable and, written to the blockchain as, as we want, but there's always going to be some wiggle room there.
Well, so just as one example, somewhere we need to write down what are the test suites that should actually pass.
Exactly. Yeah.
We run a bunch of tests that we don't consider to be blocking for this in the queue or for releases or whatever. So somewhere we need to write down principles behind what tests should be in the list, but we actually need a concrete list. Well, the questions will come up like the question came up, kubeADM tests were not in the list, right? There was a list and kubeADM tests were not in the list, and those tests were failing. So a decision had to be made. Should we extend the list at literally the last minute, or should we do something else? So I mean, yes, there will always need to be some kind of last minute decision.
Hi,
Dan from CNCF. Yeah, thanks. Could just 30 seconds so I can jump in like Rumpelstiltskin. I just wanted to agree that I actually don't think CNCF has a role to play here. We're very available to the Kubernetes project if there's any kind of manual review that you want on something, but you should think of it almost as a sort of automatable thing that you haven't gotten around to automating yet. And then we would follow the directions that you gave for it. But I definitely would not recommend delegating any sort of important judgment issue on, oh, is this release ready to ship yet or not, to us.
All right, thanks, Dan. Just for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and continue. If we want to continue this conversation, we do have plenty of time tomorrow as well. Jace, I think you actually had, and you had another item as well. The marketing deliverables.
Yeah, this was another interesting thing where basically we had a lot of churn at the last minute about the blog, the official blog that went on Kubernetes. Essentially, the marketing team was trying to sort of say, well, what are the high level themes, and sort of follow the playbook that we had for prior releases. And earlier in the release process, sort of at a lower level, we had declared quote unquote bankruptcy on having release level themes because frankly, there weren't release level themes. And basically, as we had kind of alluded to earlier, SIGs were driving the bus this time. So if a SIG had a theme, that was going to supersede anything that we did at a project level. So, and I thought that was actually really great because essentially what we're doing, and we tried to call out, was that we're trying to address the richness and depth of Kubernetes as opposed to, hey, there's this giant gaping hole of things that Kubernetes doesn't do that we need to get on and create a feature for and whatnot. So it's really a statement about the maturity of the project in a number of different ways. And so, but what happened was that this sort of battle manifested at the last minute in the blog, where we're used to giving reporters, hey, here's our release themes and here's the things we're trying to do. It's like, well, those ideas about hardening and feature depth and all those things don't make as easy of a sell to people asking, why should I upgrade my Kubernetes cluster to 1.8? So we we had a lot of back and forth on it. I think what we came up with at the end was good, but there was a lot of churn around that. And again, really saying that Kubernetes, somebody said it in one of the meetings. I wish I remember who said it, but they said, when do you hear people talking about, releasing the next version of the Linux kernel and saying, here's a new feature? It's like, no, it's like we're trying to make the ecosystem better. And I think that that's a super powerful story. And I think it's probably how we want to orient marketing moving forward. So we just need to reconcile those things. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's not a real issue. That's like some concern and equation that we have to solve. So it's the continuation of the same question that we have with the general product management and the project management and collaboration with more low-level items. At the same time, I would compare our marketing items in this release and our marketing activities in this release compared to the previous releases. And I would say that was probably the most successful release in the marketing terms. It was all the marketing activities released centralized. We had a dedicated person on the release team. And we had Natasha Woods from CNCF, who has been actually coordinating all these marketing calls from the outer world. So I would say that we did this job good. We can do it better, and I hope we'll do it better in the next release. And that's more the question not of the marketing itself, but of more high-level questions we currently have.
All right, thanks, Igor. Are there would you say any action items from that?
I think probably starting marketing activities sooner, adding marketing deliverable dates to the overall release schedule, all going to be important. And then maybe consider creating press briefing materials separate from the blog post itself. That I think that certainly there was some confusion among the press about how to talk about this release.
There also was not a coherent marketing plan available even at the blog publication time. So making decisions about what should be covered in the release blog versus in separate blogs or later blogs couldn't really be made because no one had really thought about that, or at least it wasn't communicated and documented anywhere. And fundamentally, this issue was escalated to me. So that's a result, an obvious symptom of a process breakdown right there. So I think there needs to be a discussion about, like Jay said, about this strategy. Like, what are we trying to do with the release blog post? What is the story we're trying to tell? So we need to create a different approach to writing those blogs and doing the release marketing generally that is decided and communicated ahead of time and not at literally in the last 24 hours.
I apologize if this has already been stated, but I believe this was sort of the intent for adding a feature-free state to this part of the 1.8 release, is that we wanted to be able to say, at least using feature issues, like roughly speaking, by this date, which is a month ahead of code freeze, here are all the things, here are the big ticket items we plan on bragging about. And from that, I would have expected we'd be able to like draft a blog post or at least some kind of coherent marketing plan. So I'm not sure if we didn't get the right people involved at that time, or if that wasn't widely communicated, or if we felt like we actually didn't have enough information at that time.
I think this is a case of not having a group that is focused on marketing, because Bob Pradinsky has done a huge amount of work across the last 2 years of releases to coordinate these things quietly and behind the scenes. And he is just about to go out for pat leave. And so this particular release, he was not as engaged. And so I think we found a single point of failure, as we have found in many of our evolutions, that we really need to pull together a group that is in charge of making a marketing effort to make this go forward. So many thanks to Bob for all the work he has done in all of this, and we need to pull together a broader group to do this next time.
Yeah, and some new people were brought in, but they weren't adequately ramped up. So I think making sure that the people involved are able to understand what we're trying to do earlier, and then set some earlier deadlines. Like the feature complete deadline is great. Maybe we need some marketing materials deadlines that's ahead of the actual release date.
Yeah, I would say about Aaron's concerns. So first of all, yes, we had a feature freeze date, but unfortunately we had lots of features that have been excluded from the date and delivered later. That's the question that we have discussed with Jace a few minutes ago. The second item is that we were good with the first deadlines of submitting the blog post. So the initial version of blog post has been prepared in a few weeks before the release cut, but unfortunately we faced some issues exactly with the messaging. So we had enough content, but we had to organize that in the right way, and that was the biggest issue that we faced during the release. And yes,
one other.
Yep.
Well, I was going to add one more thing too. I think I didn't actually go through it, but I'm pretty sure I saw that the CNCF actually does have a marketing playbook for the release that was a timeline.
Right. Yeah.
So we just need to synchronize.
All right.
Yeah, answering the question on the marketing SIG, we probably can have it, but we may have the 6 Pro, and it's unlikely to add absolutely new SIG without any previous discussions. But that's the role of CNCF, so we're covering marketing activities for our projects and for Kubernetes especially, and it's also the part of the responsibility for the SIG PM. So we are also the people. We are not covering marketing itself, but we are collaborating and coordinating these efforts. But yeah,
Can I add one more thing on this? I think this is an important thing because this governance model around SIGs, what I'm hoping that we will not do is consolidate things like, let's have a central point of people to do things for the SIGs or whatnot. I'm hoping that the path forward is actually that we find enabling roles and embed those people in SIGs so that SIGs can focus on doing the work that they do and be the experts on it. And then we just basically facilitate that work as opposed to trying to centralize it outside of the SIGs. Because the further you get from the SIGs, the further you get from the actual written release notes from the SIGs, the more you distill information out of that, the less accurate it is and the more it becomes a management fiasco. So if for marketing, what I would love to see is SIGs take their best shot at writing their release notes and whatever that they want to call out as their important and vital work, the value that they're adding. And then hopefully we can facilitate from a marketing perspective what that looks like in print and do the amazing work that Jennifer and Radhika did, the wordsmithing and all that stuff that maybe shouldn't be the SIG's responsibility, but we should be empowering. And so we're not trying to come up with a centralized group to handle that stuff, because if the centralized group is always going to be a bottleneck and it's never going to scale.
All right. Thanks, Jace. All right, let's finish up 2 more for today, and then we will continue tomorrow. Jennifer, it looks like you had some dittos on release notes content, but also some documentation comments.
Yeah, I only added the release notes content thing. Steve was the one who bore the brunt of the documentation requests coming in late. I mean, some stuff is going to come in hot, especially at the level of release notes. But there's really, we should get better about the stabilizing all of the content that we can earlier on. And this is, I'm just the voice for this. It is an issue other folks had to deal with too.
All right. And then it looks like there was a anonymous comment. Looks like better test coverage for features being characterized as beta. Several issues discovered in kubelet client cert rotation, not enabled in any ED tests. Does anybody have any comments about that? I don't know, or Aaron or anybody want to comment on that? All right. If not, then we move to more test coverage. Said Jordan. Anybody on the line? Let's see. No. All right. Let's skip that then. Jace, do you want to take the next one then really quick? We have 4 minutes. The issues that are non-blocking at the end.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So there were things that got punted out of the release as far as being issues that were important but not blocking. We need to figure out how to get the patch workflow in place. So do those automatically get set up as cherry picks? Whatever the fixes are for those issues, or how do we make sure those don't get lost? Because essentially, when things trail off from from one release and into the next, that's a really sloppy time, right? Stuff can get lost in the churn there, and I want to make sure that there's some way of tagging or something to make sure, like, hey, this issue needs to be addressed in the next patch release. So it may not go into 1.8.0, but this absolutely needs to be fixed by the end of 1.8.1, and it becomes essentially a blocking issue for the next patch release. But there's really nothing in place for that, so we need to figure out how to handle that.
I guess we still have time for one more. So you want to do the next one as well, the 2 release notes? People.
Yeah, 2 release people worked like relentlessly on this. And not only that, but I also worked relentlessly on this. So, and then people from SIGDocs worked relentlessly. So this was the release notes was a huge time sink for a lot of people. And I would say that for the release team on 1.9, 2 people at minimum, and ideally more than that. And hopefully we get more participation out of SIGs.
SIGDocs is trying to take the lead on this too. I put a note in the chat, trying to take release note work out to the SIGs and get writer help at that level early in the release.
Yeah, actually, I maybe filed that under things that went well. Like having 2
Yes.
docs people went tremendously well. I don't know if anybody here has the institutional knowledge. Like we actually tried to move the docs deadline way up for this release compared to the prior releases to attempt to solve this release note conundrum, and docs coming in last minute. Does anybody feel like that actually worked, or would we have done better to actually keep the docs deadline about 2 weeks further out where it has been in the past?
So I felt like it could have worked, but that I didn't find the proper forms of communication to let people know about those deadlines. So that's what I would need to do better next time, is make sure I know all the email groups that I need to use and other forms of communication that would really communicate to people that we have these deadlines.
All right. And I think that's it for today. We are going to head and wrap up tomorrow. Like I said, same time, same place. Does anybody have any last minute comments, questions, or concerns? All right. That is it. Thank you very much for attending, and we will talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Paris, for facilitating.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks, Paris.
Yeah.
Happy Thursday.
Thanks, Elise. Yeah. Talk to you soon.
And happy steering committee elections.
Yes.